Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I remember exactly when the emergency alert arrived on my phone. The screen lit up with bold red letters announcing a citywide lockdown due to a dangerous virus. There was a single message that everyone seemed to receive at once. Emergency alert, zombie outbreak, citywide lockdown. Remain indoors and await further instructions. I was alone in my small apartment at the time. For years I had been an eco-activist, committed to peaceful change. The idea that a virus was now responsible for a new kind of threat felt like a grim reflection of all the warnings I had tried to share with others about environmental imbalance. Only this time, nobody could sweep the emergency under the rug. It was real, and it was here. I checked outside from behind my kitchen window. The street was strangely empty. A single car was stalled at an awkward angle, its hazard lights blinking. I could see a figure near the driver's side door, but I could not tell if it was a person in need or someone already changed by the virus. Rumors had spread that these infected were not typical mindless zombies. Some displayed unusual behaviors, possibly even retaining bits of intelligence. Whispers of cunning or strategic movement circulated, but I had yet to see it with my own eyes. Although I considered myself brave when standing up for animal rights or organizing climate rallies, this was different. The city was under lockdown, and a real threat roamed the streets. My phone buzzed with multiple notifications from friends and acquaintances, all in a frantic attempt to find safety. I skimmed messages filled with panic. No shelter, no guidance, no clue how to survive. Through the window, I suddenly noticed that the figure by the car was gone. Unsure of what to do, I decided to move away from open windows. Barricading myself seemed unnatural to my personality. I had always been the type who wanted to help, but in that moment I realized it might be more complicated than simply stepping outdoors with good intentions. The virus had changed everything. An emergency broadcast crackled through my phone's speaker. The voice was shaky but formal. Attention, residents. The situation remains critical. Infected individuals display unpredictable behavior. Shelter in place. Avoid all interaction with possibly infected persons. Further updates will be provided. The phrase, unpredictable behavior, echoed in my mind. As an eco-activist, I had studied how viruses can mutate in animal populations. The idea that a virus could mutate in humans and then produce such horrific symptoms felt like a nightmare scenario I had only read about in theoretical case studies. My instincts screamed caution, yet I could not shake the urge to learn more. I decided to check on my neighbor. Her name was Lydia, and she was a biology student at the local university. She would have relevant insights on a virus. Since we were on the same floor, I felt less risk in crossing the hallway. Still, I carried a makeshift protective barrier, a small board I had once used as a sign during a protest. It was flimsy, but it gave me a hint of confidence. The hallway lights flickered. There was a stale odor in the air, as though the ventilation system had abruptly stopped functioning. I knocked softly on Lydia's door. No answer. After a pause, I heard a faint scratching sound, but I could not determine if it was coming from inside her apartment or somewhere else on the floor. I knocked again. Nothing. My phone vibrated with more texts, so I retreated to my apartment to read them. A friend had written, "They aren't the typical zombies. Some act like they remember us. Be careful." Another friend shared a blurred video of someone standing on top of a barricaded truck, calling to an infected individual who seemed to pause and look upward. That alone hinted that these zombies had some trace of awareness. It wasn't just a blind, shambling menace. I sat at my small kitchen table trying to piece together a plan. The city was locked down, but I did not want to harm anything, even an infected person. My pacifist beliefs were the core of my identity. For years, I had participated in wildlife rescues and peaceful protests. Resorting to force against these new threats felt like a line I never thought I would cross. Still, I had to acknowledge that this virus might not respond to rational discussion. Reports on social media grew more alarming. Some claimed the infected could open doors or coordinate with one another. Others said that was nonsense. Confusion spread faster than accurate information, and it became hard to know which posts to trust. Something inside me insisted that if these people had once been human, neighbors, friends, or family members, maybe they retained some shred of identity. Could negotiation be possible? Could there be a cure? My thoughts raced as I watched the clock tick past midnight, waiting for the next official announcement. That night, I did not rest. Everything outside was silent, yet it felt as if the entire building was on edge. A few times I heard distant footsteps in the hallway. A faint moan drifted through the ventilation system. Then another emergency alert buzzed on my phone. Law enforcement has been overwhelmed. Limit movement. Remain in safe locations until rescue units are deployed. My phone battery was draining faster than usual. Each time I plugged it into the wall, I wondered if the power grid would remain stable. I decided that staying in my apartment forever was not viable. I needed supplies. Perhaps I could find a safer place where others had gathered. I also wanted answers. The possibility of a more intelligent group of zombies demanded investigation. If they were still partially aware, maybe there was a chance for peaceful resolution, or at least a chance to help them in some way. I gathered what little gear I had: a sturdy backpack, a portable phone charger, some canned food, a flashlight, and a few personal documents. Before stepping into the hallway, I took a breath, reminding myself why I was doing this. My hope was to search for Lydia, as well as any official updates that might lead me to a safe zone. The hallway was dim, lit only by emergency lamps. I cautiously called out, "Lydia, is anyone there?" My voice echoed. No reply. The door across from mine was slightly ajar. That was unusual because the neighbor there kept everything locked. With careful steps, I peered into the living room. It was empty, though furniture was toppled and scattered. There were signs of someone leaving in a hurry. No obvious sign of a struggle, but it felt clear they had vacated. As I backed out of the apartment, I heard faint movement from the floor above. The building had an old central stairwell, so I considered heading upstairs. But I remembered that Lydia lived on this floor, so I decided to try her door one more time. The corridor smelled stale, with the occasional flicker of a failing light bulb overhead. Her door was locked. This time I pressed my ear gently against the wood. Something brushed against the other side. It was a soft sound, almost like a hush. I knocked again, urging her to respond if she was safe. Moments passed without any clear indication of what was happening inside. My instincts told me not to force it open. It might provoke someone already infected, or worse. I left a note under her door. "Trying to find you. Please stay safe." Perhaps she would see it if she was healthy. The stairwell leading down to the lobby felt colder than usual. The emergency lights were dim, creating shadows that twisted around corners. When I reached the first floor, I saw the front door was barricaded from the inside using loose tables and chairs from the mailroom. A faint odor lingered in the air, an odor I associated with closed-off spaces and old, damp cardboard. I eased one of the chairs aside and peered out through the glass. Beyond the entrance, the street was deserted. Flickering streetlights revealed abandoned cars, scattered debris, and signs of quick evacuation. I pulled on the door, and it creaked. For a second, I worried that the noise would attract unwanted attention, but I needed to proceed if I wanted to find answers or a safer haven. Stepping outside felt surreal. The city I knew so well appeared lifeless. Normally, I would see people walking dogs, riding bikes, or going about their day. Now it resembled a scene from a forgotten world. I clutched my backpack and moved along the sidewalk, keeping close to the walls of the buildings. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley. I froze, unsure if this was an infected individual or someone desperately searching for help. I tried to speak calmly. "Hello? Do you need assistance?" The person paused and tilted their head as if studying me. Then they stepped forward into the light. Their eyes looked clouded, but their posture was not the vacant slump I imagined typical zombies would have. Instead, it was as if they were attempting to remember something. I took a small step back, not out of aggression, but to maintain a cautious distance. The figure's gaze locked onto me. Then, surprisingly, they seemed to mouth a few words. I could not make out what they were saying, but the movement of their lips was deliberate. This indicated more than just a basic reflex. I stayed calm. Something about their presence felt unusual, as though they were analyzing the situation. For a moment, I hoped this individual was not fully lost to the infection. Perhaps they were one of those rumored smart infected. The figure took a step closer, and I raised my hands gently, signaling peace. My voice was quiet. "It's okay. I'm not here to harm you." Before I could attempt further communication, I noticed a second figure lurking behind them. This second one lurched forward more aggressively, as though guided by an overpowering urge. The first figure stepped aside, and both began to converge on my position with unsettling coordination. I realized that staying in one place was a bad idea. Carefully, I retreated, moving back toward my building, aware that I might not outrun them if they decided to charge. In the brief moment before I slipped inside and re-barricaded the door, I heard a sort of hushed vocalization from the first figure, almost like a low moan that attempted to form words. Then I lost sight of them as I secured the entrance. My pulse throbbed with adrenaline, and I realized the rumors were true. Some of these infected were not the slow, mindless creatures from old stories. They still carried fragments of memory or intention. I decided that if I was going to navigate this crisis, I needed to find others who had some knowledge of the virus or had useful survival skills. I recalled that Lydia was a biology student. Perhaps she had lab contacts who might be working on a solution. My decision became clear: locate anyone with scientific expertise, possibly at the nearby university. The thought of traveling across town felt daunting. Yet I knew the campus was my best lead. I also recalled that a friend named Ravi had once interned at a hospital lab. If I could reach him, maybe I would learn something about this strange infection. He had texted me earlier to say he was sheltering in place at a small medical clinic near the university. To leave my building again, I decided to head out through the parking garage. It connected to an alley that might allow me to avoid major roads. I double-checked the lobby barricade and made sure it remained intact behind me. Dark corners, echoing footsteps. The parking garage was a gloomy maze of concrete pillars. Most vehicles sat abandoned. A few had doors open, as though people left in a sudden rush. My footsteps created a hollow resonance in the otherwise quiet structure. As I moved deeper, I heard a subtle rustling. It was impossible to tell if it was the wind, a stray animal, or something worse. I kept my flashlight off, relying on the faint emergency lights overhead. It felt safer to remain unnoticed. Then, to my left, I spotted a single silhouette near a compact car. The figure was bent over the hood, its posture strangely still. Worried it might be infected, I crept around, hoping to avoid confrontation. When I reached the far side of the garage, my path was blocked by a fallen security gate that had been bent and jammed. It would take considerable effort to move it. I realized I had no choice but to pass near the silhouette to reach the exit ramp. Gathering what composure I had, I inched forward, careful not to generate noise. The figure's stance did not shift, but I sensed a heightened awareness. As I moved closer, I caught a glimpse of its face in the dim light, pale, with an unfocused stare. Suddenly, it swiveled its head toward me. There was a moment of eerie calm, then a slow, unnatural tilt, like it was considering whether to approach me. This was all the encouragement I needed to get out. I glanced at the exit ramp and saw a faint glow from the streetlights above. Without a second look back, I maneuvered around the rows of cars until I was close to the ramp. The figure did not follow, at least not immediately. Maybe it was uncertain or disoriented. Either way, I felt relief once I reached fresh air. Emerging into the alley, I found scattered trash bins and a few wooden pallets. The stench of rotting waste was stronger than normal, possibly because city services had stopped. The path to the main road was about 2 blocks away. I knew the university was several miles further. My plan was to move quietly, street by street, avoiding large open areas. I noticed that the sky was overcast, leaving the city even darker than usual. Streetlights flickered in sporadic intervals. Everything felt surreal. Buildings that once teemed with activity now stood as silent guardians of empty roads. Occasionally distant sounds echoed, maybe a door slamming or a muffled voice. A single ambulance was parked at the corner. Its doors were wide open, the lights off, possibly abandoned during a patient transport. The grim reminder that help was either gone or in hiding did little to boost my morale. I kept moving, clinging to the side of the street. Halfway down the block, I passed a small grocery store with a shattered front window. Goods were strewn across the sidewalk, and I spotted a few footsteps in the spilled flour near the entrance. I debated whether to slip inside for additional supplies. Before I could decide, I heard a shuffle in the store. It sounded like multiple individuals rummaging. They might have been other survivors, or they might have been infected. I did not have the means to verify without risking a risky confrontation, so I chose to continue on my route. Eventually, I reached the smaller roads near the medical clinic where Ravi was said to be. This area was usually bustling with students and staff from the university campus, but it now resembled a ghost town. The clinic itself had boarded up windows. A single security light shone above the entrance. I approached and knocked softly. No response. I tried again. After a pause, I heard a cautious voice inside ask for a password. Surprised, I replied that I was just looking for my friend Ravi. The door cracked open a few inches, revealing a worried face belonging to a stranger. She sized me up, then asked me several questions about how I got there, and whether I had seen any infected nearby. Satisfied that I posed no immediate threat, she let me in. Inside, I found a small group of people huddled together in the clinic's waiting area. There were makeshift cots and medical supplies scattered across tables. They eyed me with suspicion, but I tried to explain my situation. My background in environmental activism, my desire to find answers about the virus, and my hope that Ravi might have some knowledge. The woman who opened the door introduced herself as Celia. She was a nurse who had stayed behind when the outbreak became critical. She informed me that Ravi was in a back office, helping analyze basic test results from blood samples they managed to collect. I was relieved to know he was still safe and active. Celia led me down a corridor with flickering lights. We passed by a few closed doors, behind which I could hear soft murmurs, or the quiet rustle of someone moving. Finally, we reached a cramped office where Ravi was bent over a microscope. He looked up with surprise. "You made it here? How?" he asked in disbelief. I explained my journey and what I had seen. The apparently organized movement of some zombies, the vacant streets, the scattered messages urging caution. Ravi listened intently, and when I finished, he let out a thoughtful sigh. He pointed to a small whiteboard on the wall. It featured a series of notes about virus strains, symptoms, and the possibility of partial consciousness in the infected. There was even a hypothesis that certain individuals remained cognitively aware, depending on how quickly the virus spread through their system. Some people seemed to retain a lot of motor skills, Ravi explained, keeping his voice measured. In rare cases, they might even hold on to scraps of memory. We've seen infected wander back to their old homes or workplaces, like some primal instinct leads them there. I felt an uneasy mix of relief and dread. This new type of outbreak was not a simple scenario of mindless zombies. It was something more complicated. My pacifist nature told me that if these infected individuals had any hope of recovery, or at least some awareness, they deserved an attempt at help. Ravi showed me a small vial of what he believed to be a mutated strain of the virus. Under a microscope, It displayed a structure that indicated it could rewrite neural pathways without fully destroying them. It was both remarkable and unsettling. "The real challenge," Ravi said, "is figuring out if there's a way to reverse it. We've barely scratched the surface. Every time we try to analyze a new sample, we find a slight mutation that makes it resistant to the usual treatments." He explained that the group had tried to contact larger medical facilities, but lines of communication were sporadic. The citywide lockdown meant nobody could move freely, and the infected roamed everywhere. Even if researchers outside the city had better equipment, it would be nearly impossible to deliver samples. Everything was at a standstill. Despite the danger, some among this group felt that staying put was not an option. Medical supplies were running low, and none of them knew how long the boarded-up windows could hold if a large group of infected discovered their location. They needed more resources, and if possible, a path to coordinate with a larger hospital. I remembered hearing rumors about an official shelter near the east side of the city. The next day, after some deliberation, a plan took shape. A small team would attempt to reach that shelter, hoping to find advanced medical support for analyzing the virus. Ravi wanted to go, but also felt the need to remain at the clinic to continue his work. I volunteered to help scout the route, given that I had managed to traverse several blocks already. Celia insisted that I take at least one person with me. "You can't go alone. We need to watch each other's backs out there." So, we formed a group of 3. Myself, a local volunteer named Kara, and another survivor named Louis, who had once been part of an urban search and rescue team. We set out at dawn, hoping the early light would minimize any encounters. The city still felt eerie. Our path took us near the university, where tall campus buildings loomed on either side. The sound of our footsteps on the pavement reminded me of a quiet protest march in which I had once participated. Except now, there were no chants, no signs, only hushed whispers and watchful eyes. As we crossed a courtyard, we spotted a lone infected figure near a bench. Its clothing suggested it might have been a professor or a student only days before. We crouched behind a low wall, trying to see if it showed any heightened awareness. The figure was pacing in a small circle, pausing every so often to tilt its head and listen. We decided to avoid direct contact. Our group crept along a different route, weaving through the shadows cast by the morning light. Further along, we encountered a blocked intersection. 2 city buses had crashed, forming a makeshift barrier. We considered squeezing around them, but then we saw several more infected on the other side, moving between scattered vehicles. We chose a side street instead. As we navigated a narrow lane, we heard a muffled voice calling from an open window above. A face peered down at us, eyes filled with desperation. "I've been stuck here for days," the voice said. "Do you have any water?" Kara rummaged in her pack and pulled out a small bottle. She placed it on a ledge of a nearby dumpster and told the person to lower a rope or something similar. A makeshift line of cloth came down, and we secured the bottle to it. The stranger quickly hoisted it up, muttering words of relief. We asked if the building had more survivors, or if they knew anything about the rumored shelter. The response was vague. "No one here is uninfected but me. I'm too afraid to leave. The others, they changed on the first night." We tried to offer encouragement, suggesting that they barricade their door and consider joining us once the route was deemed safe. The stranger only replied, "I can't," and withdrew, closing the window. I could sense their fear, their reluctance to step outside. It was a testament to how quickly society had fractured. Eventually, we reached an area near the city's main park. Tall trees swayed in the breeze, and the manicured paths were littered with debris. At the far edge stood a large community center, which we believed might lead to the emergency shelter. As we moved closer, we heard subdued voices. We signaled one another to proceed carefully. In the parking lot behind the community center, we saw a small group. At first, I assumed they were survivors. Then I realized several of them moved in that slow but aware manner we had come to associate with advanced infected. One stood at the front, scanning the environment as though on guard duty. Another was methodically trying to open a locked service door. A third lingered near a set of metal dumpsters, occasionally tipping its head to listen for sounds. It was as if they were searching for something, and they appeared coordinated. I exchanged anxious glances with Cara and Luis. A confrontation with a large group of infected, especially ones displaying problem-solving behavior, was not something we were prepared for. We silently backed away, hoping to circle around and avoid detection. Then, without warning, one of them turned our way. Its eyes showed a flicker of recognition. It let out a sound, not a wild cry, but more like a firm exclamation. The others immediately paused their tasks. In unison, their heads pivoted toward us, and a tense standoff began. We had nowhere to run without making noise. The path behind us was blocked by low fences, and the only clear route was past the group in the parking lot. For a drawn-out moment, we all froze. One of the infected took a step forward. Luis raised his arms in a defensive stance, signaling for Cara and me to stay back. My mind raced with possible ways to defuse the situation, but it was impossible to know if they could understand, or if reason was entirely lost to the infection. The lead figure advanced a little more, making a low vocalization that almost sounded like a command. Another infected began to fan out to our right. We realized they were trying to corner us. Although we had no intention of violence, it was clear they considered us either intruders or prey. We had to act. Luis whispered for us to move back around the fence. I tried to keep my movements slow and calm, but one infected darted toward us in a sudden burst of speed. Cara sidestepped, narrowly avoiding a collision. We bolted in the opposite direction, weaving through the obstacles in the lot. I caught a glimpse of the infected scattering, each moving with purpose. We found a narrow gap between a fence and a parked truck. Squeezing through, we emerged onto a side street. The infected might have lost line of sight, but we could not be sure. With no time to linger, we pushed forward, adrenaline urging us to keep running until we reached the next block. Finally, we saw a sign for the emergency shelter. It was a high school gymnasium that the city had repurposed during disasters. The front entrance was fortified by metal barriers. Volunteers with reflective vests waved us forward after checking for signs of infection. We were ushered inside a wide open space filled with cots, supply tables, and anxious families. A few medics were present, attending to anyone who showed unusual symptoms. Cara gave a hurried report of what happened in the parking lot. One official took notes, frowning at every mention of organized infected. It seemed that although rumors were widespread, official acknowledgement was scarce. They thanked us for the information and suggested we rest. Inside the shelter, the tension was palpable. Whispers of missing loved ones circulated. People clutched phones that no longer had reliable signals. Others tried to contact relatives who might be holed up in distant neighborhoods. I looked around at the faces, searching for any sign of hope. The relief washed over me that we had found a place free from immediate danger. I could not ignore the lingering dread about what was happening outside. My first priority was to update Ravi and Celia. I found a volunteer at a makeshift communication station trying to maintain a short-range radio link with various pockets of survivors. The volunteer offered to put out a call to the clinic. Minutes passed as static filled the airwaves, punctuated by fragments of voices that were difficult to decipher. Finally, we heard Celia's voice. "The situation here is stable for now. We have a few new arrivals, but no advanced infected at the moment." We briefly informed her that we found the shelter and that it was operational. She mentioned Ravi's research was ongoing, though they lacked essential lab equipment. I relayed everything about the organized group of infected we had encountered and urged them to stay alert. Before the signal faded, Celia repeated a final request. "If you can bring any additional medical tools or resources back, we can attempt to refine the tests for a cure." Resting on a bench near the shelter's entrance, I reflected on my predicament. My principles as a pacifist and environmental activist were being tested in a dire context. Part of me wanted to believe that these infected people, showing glimmers of cognition, could be saved. Another part acknowledged the immediate danger they posed to everyone else. I recalled the face of the first infected I encountered near my apartment, the way they seemed to mouth silent words. Something in that moment hinted at a lingering humanity that might still exist beneath the virus. If there was a chance to reach them, to treat them, then I felt duty-bound to pursue it. However, the citywide lockdown and the breakdown of basic infrastructure made it nearly impossible to coordinate such efforts without risking further harm. Early the next morning, as volunteers and survivors busied themselves with chores in the shelter, I slipped outside to gather my thoughts. The sun's light revealed a city still under siege. Even from a distance, I could see abandoned vehicles, empty windows, and the distant shapes of individuals moving between buildings. An older volunteer joined me. She had once worked as a community organizer, and in a hushed tone, she asked if I believed there was any way to negotiate with the infected. We spoke about the moral dimension of acknowledging that these were once ordinary citizens. Could a vaccine or treatment be discovered in time? Was there a path to reason with them? It struck me that if we truly believed in empathy and compassion, we had to try. Yet I also knew we had to protect ourselves and others. Any plan would require caution and expertise. That meant forging a connection between the shelter, the clinic, and any other pockets of survivors who were equipped to handle the scientific side of the crisis. Communication remained the greatest challenge. By midday, rumors spread that a group of volunteers was planning to reclaim a section of the city, clearing out infected where possible, and establishing a secure corridor. The notion unsettled me. Although it sounded like it might bring stability, I worried about the means they might use, potentially harming infected who retained fragments of consciousness. I spoke up, reminding everyone that if there was a chance these individuals could be cured, any extreme measures might erase that possibility forever. The atmosphere grew tense. Some volunteers believed there was no hope and saw no alternative but to contain or eliminate threats to ensure public safety. Others expressed uncertainty, torn between ethical obligations and survival. In the end, it was decided that while the volunteers would set up fortifications, they would attempt non-lethal methods where possible, at least until more was understood about the infection. It was an uneasy compromise, but it was the best I could hope for, given the circumstances. I offered to help with anything that might reduce conflict. In response, they asked me to accompany a scouting team that aimed to map out places where infected tended to gather. Perhaps understanding their patterns would give us a chance to avoid large clashes. I spent the next hours traversing alleyways and side streets with a small group, staying in constant contact with the shelter via portable radios. We took notes on areas where we saw signs of multiple infected, markings on walls that seemed to indicate repeated attempts at entry, and places that might be suitable for setting up temporary safe houses. It was risky, but we managed to avoid direct encounters by staying out of sight whenever possible. One unexpected finding was that certain infected displayed territorial behavior. They lingered in specific locations, possibly places where they lived or worked before. This supported Ravi's theory that fragments of memory guided them. If so, there might be a window of communication yet to be discovered. We marked each observation on a large city map. Occasionally, we would spot small groups of survivors hurriedly crossing intersections. Most looked too frightened to communicate, dashing into abandoned buildings or sneaking into side streets. Our calls of greeting were rarely answered. Once our scouting mission concluded, I felt compelled to deliver the new data to the clinic. There was talk of sending a courier, but I volunteered to go myself, believing that I could answer any questions Ravi had regarding our findings. Though I had grown somewhat accustomed to navigating these uncertain streets, fear still clung to me at every turn. I set out with the map carefully stored in a waterproof folder. Along the way, I avoided major roads, slipping through residential blocks that had fewer infected. However, Near an intersection, I heard what sounded like a group marching in unison. Curious and cautious, I peered around the corner. There, I spotted a formation of infected moving in a coordinated manner, led by one who seemed to be issuing soft vocalizations. It was an unsettling sight. This was more than a scattered crowd. It looked as if they were following a plan. I held my breath, pressing myself against a wall as they passed. When they were gone, I realized they were heading in the general direction of the clinic. Worried, I hurried forward, hoping to arrive before they did. Reaching the clinic, I alerted Celia and Ravi. They quickly secured entrances and informed the survivors inside of a potential threat. Together we peered out through the boarded windows, searching for any sign of the infected group. Minutes turned into an hour, and still they did not arrive. Perhaps they changed course, or maybe they sensed the building was fortified. In the lull, Ravi examined the map I brought. He was especially intrigued by the patterns we noted about certain infected, repeatedly returning to significant locations. "This could be the key," he said. "It means their brains haven't been completely erased. If we can isolate the part of the virus responsible for preserving memory, maybe we can find a countermeasure, or at least a way to stall the infection." His excitement was tempered by the realization that this would require advanced medical technology that neither he nor the clinic possessed. Yet, hope glimmered. There was something about his determination that reminded me why we fight for causes we believe in, even when the odds seem insurmountable. I offered to help in any way possible, whether it meant returning to the shelter to gather more resources or attempting to contact any larger research facility beyond the city. Celia mentioned hearing rumors of a mobile lab set up by a government task force somewhere near the old sports stadium, but nobody had confirmed it. It might be another false lead. Still, it was worth investigating. As I readied myself to leave, Ravi placed a hand on my shoulder and thanked me for holding on to my principles. He understood how challenging it was for a pacifist to navigate a world where a virus had turned neighbors into potential dangers. Yet, the lines were not as clear as people might think. If some infected could eventually be saved, it was our moral responsibility to try. Stepping back outside, I felt a mixture of unease and renewed resolve. The city might be locked down, but there were still threads of hope and collaboration weaving through the chaos. People like Celia, Ravi, and the volunteers at the shelter were doing everything they could. The crisis exposed the fragility of our world, but also highlighted our capacity to adapt and show compassion. Days would pass, and the lockdown would remain in effect. The virus continued to evolve, and the presence of organized, possibly intelligent zombies spread fear. But in that fear, small pockets of survivors worked tirelessly to find solutions that did not compromise their humanity. The path was unclear, and success was not guaranteed. Still, whenever I encountered an infected who seemed to pause, as though recalling a piece of their past, I felt a faint sense of optimism. Perhaps there was a chance that we could bridge the gap between what they had become and who they once were. It would require empathy, caution, and scientific breakthroughs we had yet to discover. For now, the city stands in uneasy silence, with each day a test of resourcefulness and moral fortitude. Although we do not know how or when this crisis will end, we carry on with the firm belief that every life, even one touched by the virus, might hold a spark worth saving. This is what drives us forward, an unwavering commitment to protect what remains of our world, and the hope that someday we can restore those lost to the infection. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.